afternoon, everyone. Before starting the session, may I request all of you to please turn your cell phone on silent. Thank you. Okay, so I welcome you all to the Department for Educational 12th Educational Grand Round. And today's topic for presentation is standard setting, the art and science of setting defensible and credible cutoff scores. I would like to, we have few participants online as well from exam board, from Human Development Program, and from IED. Can you hear us? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Can you hear me, the online participants?
Yes.
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 They're not, okay. Okay. Okay, I would like to invite Dr. Naveed Yusuf. He's an assistant professor in the Department for Educational Development, Faculty of Health Sciences, and associate director, Assessment and Research Examination Board at Aga Khan University Hospital. He's an advisor on psychometrics and standard setting for the Royal College of General Practitioners, International Board, and member of the International Association for Educational Assessment Recognition Committee for developing international standards for assessment. So over to you, Dr. Naveed.
Thank you, Amber. I hope you all can hear me clearly. Welcome to the Educational Grand Round on Standard Setting. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Let's begin. Right, so what do we aim to achieve today by the end of the session? We will try that we all are able to recognize standard setting as an important step to enhance the validity of assessment decisions, to describe the commonly used standard setting methods with their strengths and limitations, and to differentiate between the compensatory and conjunctive standard setting methods. The outline of the presentation. We'll start with the term standard setting as it is not clearly understood or there are various misconceptions about the term itself. And then I will try to give you the history. Why did it start and where did it start? We'll move on to the bigger agenda assessment because standard setting attempts to enhance the validity of assessment decisions. So what is the role? And then we'll come back to standard setting again. Why, the types, the methods, some information about my PhD study on standard setting and some further thoughts for you to take away. So what is standard setting? Standard setting is a process to establish a credible, defensible, and acceptable passing score or cutoff score for any examination. It is very commonly confused with the term standardization. Standardization means giving the same exam to all students, to be fair with them, to treat all students fairly and equally. Standard setting is a science to identify the pass score or the cutoff scores, and we'll talk about it in detail today. When did it start and how did it start? It happened somewhere in the early 20th century, where a few university law students took the university to the court. They were studying law, they were good at it. Probably the university taught them well, but they did not pass the examination. They failed the examination by 1 or 2 score points. For example, if the passing score was 50, they scored 49. And they made a case in the court of law saying, how can a university prove that students scoring a score of 50% will be good lawyers, and we scoring 49% will not be good lawyers? And of course, as you may guess, the university lost the case. And this is what we all do day in and day out. We all have our passing scores, we all have our cutoff scores, and there is no rationale or basis behind. We all have fallen in the same trap. We all are trapped because we do not have passing scores which are defensible or which are credible. Now let's move on to assessment. What is assessment? Assessment at large, educational assessment or academic assessment, is described as a process, as a systematic process to evaluate, judge, measure, and document students' academic achievement against expected outcomes, competencies, curricula, learning objectives, right? There are three main purposes for any assessment. Number one, we want to measure the level of achievement, the level of each student's achievement against the expected criteria, curriculum, outcomes, performance standard, right? So if I say a student scored 74% in biochemistry or in biology, we all infer that the students know 74 or 64% of the curriculum, right? This is the general inference we all derive. The second ultimate aim of assessment and for measuring and scoring is to differentiate between the different level of students. We want to know who scored higher, who is more capable, who has achieved more, who has learned more, who is able to perform more than others. And then we classify them as pass and fail, pass, fail honors, needs remediation or can be promoted, incompetent, competent, and in so many ways based on the same score. The ultimate aim is to make assessment decisions, and to make assessment decisions which we try our best and we assume are valid enough, are correct enough, are appropriate enough, are accurate enough, defensible enough, right? And to make such decisions, we try every bit. I can see faculty members here, exam coordinators, member of exam departments and units, exam coordinators, and we know that we put in our sweat and blood to make sure that we make assessment decisions which are valid, fair, reliable, right? We do so much of item reviews. When we develop exam, we use blueprints, table of examination, table of specifications, there are exam reviews, we review the results, do post-exam analysis, and after doing all this, are we really sure that we are making valid decisions? What if on the scorecard, you have all sorts of students, and in the end, you make wrong classification decisions? You pass students who should not pass, or you fail students who are deserving to pass. All these efforts go into vain because the last step is not really thought of, which is where to make the cut. Where is the point on that score line where we can credibly, defensively say that these are the ones who needs remediation, these are the ones who can be promoted or are pass or clear pass, and these are the ones who are honors or distinctions or awardees. Right? Make sense? So this is what standard setting helps us to do. This is the score line. Students may score anywhere from a 0% to 100%. We know that we will classify students based on various classification criteria based on the purpose of assessment, and then we'll make some assessment decisions, classification decisions, and we make these cutoffs based on our intuition, based on wider practices, based on what our seniors and others were doing till today. And sometimes we make a 30% or a 33% pass mark. Sometimes we make a 50 or a 55 or a 60% pass mark, makes it rigid enough, a 60%, and think we have done the right job. However, there is no evidence. And standard setting is a science and an art. We'll come to the art bit of it as well, which helps us to decide where to cut, how to classify, and how to make this last very important classification decision, just to make sure that we make valid assessment decisions. Let's come to different standard setting methods now. The first one is a fixed standard. We all follow it day in and day out. It is based on intuition. A few of us I know follow a 33% pass mark. The others I know follow a 50, 55, or a 60% pass mark. And then there are standard setting methods. You will see classifications who would classify a fixed method as a standard setting method. I don't include it in the standard setting method. So there are norm-based and criterion-based methods. We'll go into detail. What are these? And then in the criterion-based, we have exam-centered and examinee-centered methods. In one, you look at the test or the exam. In the other, you look at the performance of the candidate, student, or examinee, and then decide. So what is the difference between the two main criteria, norm referenced and criterion referenced? Norm referenced is dependent upon the score of the cohort of students sitting in the examination. It is dependent on the mean scores, for example, or how do they perform. So for example, you may decide that the top 20% would always pass, or a top 10% will always get in honors. Bottom 5% will always fail, regardless of their score. So it depends on how the cohort is performing. Regardless of their performance, regardless of their ability, regardless of their achievement, a top 50 or 60% may always pass, a bottom 5 or 10% may always fail. So it is not content related, and fixed percentage of students will fail every time, or fixed percentage of students will pass every time. It is used. In some situations, it is valid to use such methods, and those are selection tests. We know we will always take top 100 students. We will always take top 20 students. So for selection tests, it is a valid method to an extent. Then there are criterion reference method, where the criterion is the curriculum, is the expected learning outcomes, is the expected learning objectives. And based on the expected criteria and the level of the students, we decide, content experts decide what should be the pass mark or what should be the cutoff scores. How much a student should know in order to be a clear pass or in order to be an honor student out of the complete curriculum. Sometimes it is the universe of the knowledge or skills the student is expected to know. The pass and fail rate will vary. If all students are capable enough, there will be 100% pass rate. If all students have not made it, there may be, theoretically, is 100% fail rate, because it is based on specific criteria. Yes, a very good question. How does this differ from the fixed standard? Any responses from the group? How much of a fixed standard do you follow? How much? A 30%, a 50%, a 50%. What is the rationale behind it? Right? Intuition, or what our seniors were doing, or what we were told to do just because it's a policy.
It's a policy.
Right? So we don't know. Probably, most likely, there is no rationale behind it. Right? In a criterion reference setting, you may or may not have a 50% pass mark. Even if you have a 50% pass mark for some examination, it is based on rationale. It is based on the content of the examination and what you expect and how much you expect the student to perform. So the pass mark will vary depending upon the exam. If the exam increases in difficulty, the pass mark will go down. If the exam is more easier, the pass mark will go up, right? And what do you expect the students to do? The pass mark will go up with increasing level of students and will go down with decreasing level of students. Make sense? Thank you. Timely question. So a fixed standard, what we follow, for example, a traditional, say 50%. It applies to all assessments we offer. It applies to all examinations we offer. And it applies to all kinds of examinations and assessments, easy ones and difficult ones and moderate ones. The assumption is that if there is a high pass rate, we assume that the candidate's ability or achievement was higher. We are so happy, right? The students prepared well. We don't even think or realize that probably the exam was easier. If the fail rate is high, we blame the students, they did not prepare. We do not even think if the exam was difficult or at a higher level, pitching at a higher level. So there is a core assumption that it is the ability of the candidates which is changing with no evidence. And that's where the flaw is. Here we say that there were 3 tests, and if you may notice on test 1, a considerable majority of the students failed, around 67% of them probably or more failed. And the assumption is, a false assumption without any evidence is that the students did not prepare well. The students did not know much. As compared to if you see test 3, almost all of them passed, and the assumption is that the students were prepared well and there is no thought of if the difficulty or the level of the exam changed. And this is what we all do day in and day out. Now we come to norm reference standards. We said it is based on the mean scores. It is dependent upon how the cohort will perform, right? And every time a fixed percentage of students will fail. Even if this was the same test. Here the false assumption is that the ability level, the average ability level of the students attempting the test remains the same. So every time the bottom 20% should fail. And every time the top, for example, 80% should pass. So again, a false assumption that the candidate ability remains the same from one cohort to the other. And then we come to criterion reference test, which is the best method in case if you have not realized so far. This is the best method to follow for criterion reference tests, for tests which are based on curricula or some outcomes. It sets a minimum standard for competence based on how much the student need to know in order to progress for higher studies, in order to pass, in order to get a license or a certificate, or to go to higher grades. It takes the content and the difficulty level of the exam into account, keeping in mind the level of the student. And this is how it behaves. Here, there is no assumption. We know for the fact that the ability of the students varied because the standard was set based on the content and the difficulty level of the exam paper itself. There are various norm reference methods. All of them are based on the mean scores, almost all of them. Very simple methods. You just take away one standard deviation from the mean score and it becomes the cutoff score, the passing score. There are other methods in which you will take out 1.5 standard deviation out of the mean score. Slightly lenient. There are other methods. Winian proposed a method in which you do not take out the standard deviation, you take out the standard error of measurement from the mean score, making it more fair to the students. So if there was low reliability, if there was high error, you take out a higher amount from the mean score. The cutoff goes down because this method attempts to compensate for the error, makes it fair for the students. If the reliability was high, there was less error, you take out less from the mean score, the cutoff score goes up. Again, fair for the exam developers and for the students. Cohen said, on the other hand, that the mean score is highly influenced by outliers. In any exam, there may be a few outstanding, outlying students performing very highly, and one or two or more students frequently very low, performing very low, and would influence the mean. So Cohen proposed that, and he proved through research studies, that a 95th percentile student is very stable. You take out the top 5% of the outliers. So he says, whatever the 95th percentile student scores, 60% of it becomes the passing score. So Cohen attempts to take away the adverse impact of outlying performing students from the passing score. So these are and there are many other norm reference methods. These are the ones which are more frequently used, when and where they are used. Then we come to criterion reference methods. We said that there are two main categories. In one, we look at examinee, the candidate's performance, and in the other, we look at the test or the exam-centered and examinee-centered. NGOF is an exam-centered method. We look at the exam, we look at the test, and then decide what should be the passing score or cutoff score in this exam for this level of students. On the other hand, the last two, borderline and contrasting group methods, are the examinee-centered. You look at the examinee or the candidate performing. Either you see their answer scripts in a paper and pencil test, or you see them performing or demonstrating. NGOF and borderline methods are the most widely used and recommended methods in the world today. They are the most researched methods and highly recommended. NGOF is very widely used for written examinations, mostly for one best multiple choice questions. And borderline is very widely used and highly recommended for performance-based examinations. When you see a candidate performing, for example, in clinical exams, for example, in objective structured clinical examinations, or in any other exam where you see the student's performance. So we'll go a little bit in detail on the methodology as to how the NGOF works and how the borderline method works, just so you get a flavor as to what are criterion reference and how do they take into account the difficulty and content of the examination. Some essential elements for any standard setting method, mainly criterion reference standard setting methods. You need judges, you need experts, a panel, a committee who will decide as to what is the or what will be the passing score for this examination for this level of students. Every time this exercise needs to happen. For every new exam or for a different level of students, you need to have this panel sit together and decide. The panel has to be large and representative. Literature says they should have at least 5 years. I've written 3 to 5 years because we know in certain settings, for example, in the medical college, we may not have enough experts there. So at least 3 to 5 years of experience teaching the same content and level of students, and assessing the same level of students on the same content. So they should bring this experience with them when they decide. Capacity development of these judges or experts as to what is the method and how the method is followed, the standard setting method. Orientation to the exam, what is being assessed, what is there in the exam, what tasks or skills, which questions. What is the purpose of the exam? Are we certifying them? Are we licensing them? Is it a continuous assessment? Will the students get more chances to improve and remediate? Or are we allowing them to go out and practice? So what is the stake? What is the purpose of the exam? They need to know this. And then there has to be a standard setting expert, an educational expert with experience in standard setting to guide the group and facilitate the process. And one other very essential common element is the concept of a borderline student. This needs to be discussed at length among the panel, and they should have a very clear understanding as to who do we think is a borderline student from this level of students and on this content. This is very, very essential again. Literature would define a borderline student as the one who has a 50-50 chance of passing and failing the exam, just on the border. A few other authors would write, the student may fail on bad days and pass on good days. 50-50 chance. Just there, you're unable to decide if the student is a clear pass or a clear fail. This is a very generic definition. For the panel sitting, the experts, the judges sitting, they will have to look at the content and discuss among themselves themselves as to who is that one student who for that content is a 50-50 pass-fail probability. After you have done all of this, let's go through steps of Engoff method, and then we'll also go through borderline. So 6 or more judges with experience, experts, will sit down together. They will discuss the purpose of the exam, the purpose of assessment. The process of standard setting needs to be revisited, so they are all refreshed. And the quality of a borderline student, as we just discussed, needs to be clarified. Assessment items are shared. The questions or the tasks are shared by these judges, with these judges. Each judge out of those 6 or more will then ask themselves a question for each exam item, and they will ask, what is the probability of that borderline student they had just discussed to perform on this question correctly? So they look at question number 1, and each one of them will ask themselves, what do I think is the probability, or what percentage of borderline students will pass this question or this performance task? This is very subjective, yes. Where does the subjectivity goes down? What is in the process which will go down? Content expertise, experience, at least 6 people involved, and presence of an educational facilitator, which ensures that the process goes right. Yes, maybe, but not influencing the passing score, because the experts would know, right? And then they will share their probabilities. These 2 steps, the last 2 steps, are sometimes followed and they are not followed. This may or may be part of the Engoff process. We at Aga Khan University include these 2 steps. If the difference among the judges is more than 20%, they are asked to rediscuss. And what literature says based on evidence, the closer the judgments are of the panel, the more validity the passing score have. The more variation they have means they themselves are not sure. So the passing score have less validity. So what we do to ensure higher validity, if there is a more than 20% difference, we ask them to rediscuss and try and convince each other and come to a relatively better consensus and agreement. The outliers may choose not to change their scores. They may remain as outliers. However, we know that outliers will influence the passing score. So we at AKU and at some institutions, they do not include outliers in calculation of the mean score. At others, they may. How does the passing score come out? For each question, you average the probabilities from the panel, and then you average all the averages for that exam. And this average will become the pass score for that exam. So for example, if I have 6 judges here, each one of them will give me a figure in percentage. I will average them out, and this average will become the passing score for that question. For the exam, I will average all the passing score of all questions in the exam and will get the passing score for that exam based on the content. As an expert with these many years of experience, how much do you think a student should know to pass this exam? It is not based on intuition, right? Let's come to borderline methods. In borderline methods, you do not primarily look at the content of the exam. You look at the performance of students. Of course, you know the task. However, judgments are made on the performance. For example, it's a practical demonstration, or if it's a clinical exam, the student will perform. You will mark the student on their performance. Even if it's a paper pencil test, you will look at performance. You will mark them according to the marking criteria, to the scoring criteria, to the rating scale or the rubric, whatever there is. However, there is one more judgment you will do. You will also mark that student as a clear fail, borderline, or a clear pass. This is your judgment, independent of the marking scheme, as an expert who have at least 5 years of teaching and learning experience and assessment experience for the same content for the same level of students. The global rating scale remains the same. Yes, of course. And for students you have marked as borderline, you would take those students out and will make a mean score of those borderline students. And that becomes the passing score. So the mean score of students rated as borderline fail or borderline pass or borderline will become the passing score for those students. No. For this, the passing score comes after the exam. Before the exam, you don't know what will be the passing score. Good question again. So once you look at students' observations, the raters, the experts will score, will make their judgments, and then you will get to know what is the passing score for this examination. You will not know it beforehand.
So normally a global rating scale, if somebody has written a pass,
Depends. It depends. It depends upon the policy you follow. It depends upon the policy. For workplace-based assessment, it may work because it is not high stakes, right? It's just for teaching and learning. There was one limitation of borderline group method, and the limitation was that in case if you have only a few students identified as borderline, so the pass mark is dependent upon the performance of a very few borderline students, and this becomes unreliable. It is not dependent upon the performance of the entire cohort. And what if you have just 2 or 3 students marked as borderline? What if none of the students was borderline for that question? Then what happens? And to compensate, then they came up with a borderline regression method on which the entire scores, I will not go into detail, it's a statistical regression method. The entire scores are regressed on the scale. The students who have clear failed, the students who are borderline, and the students who have clear pass. And based on the entire cohort, based on linear regression, the passing score is then determined. Borderline regression is the most widely recommended and used method today for performance-based examinations. A little bit very quickly about my PhD study. This happened in 2014, published in 2015 in Teaching and Learning. AKU, Aga Khan University, as far as I know, is the only university and only institution in the country following standard setting method. We follow it for objective structured clinical examinations. We started doing this back in 2009, and this study was based on the work we did from 2009 to 2012, I believe. This study was recommended as the suggested reading by Association for Medical Education in Europe on their website Meded portal. And this study also won the top 5 article editor choice award in 2015. We included 30 clinical examination stations, objective structured clinical examination stations we used between 2010 and 2012. We didn't use the ones we used in the first year because it was a first year in 2009. We used an itemized 7-point rating scale and global rating, as I said, because I also wanted to experiment with the borderline methods. So we had a global rating as well, if the students are borderline, clear fail or clear pass. And 4 psychometric indices were used to make sure that the 30 stations we used have very good psychometric indicators. I compared 10 different types of methods. By now you are well aware by 7 of them. The 4 norm reference, the 3 criterion reference. And then I used some new methods, which are cluster analysis methods. Just to brief you, cluster analysis is a statistical technique which is used to classify things or living things by scientists. So what you do is you put in the software the different characteristics of organisms or things, and the software will make a statistical analysis and will tell you what is the classification. So we study and read classification of plants and fungi and stars and different species. Much of them is based on cluster analysis. So I thought as part of my PhD, if cluster analysis can also help them classify the different levels of students. So we fed in the scores of students into the computer software, and we asked the computer as to how many natural clusters are there. And the computer told us there are 3 different kinds of students. It was easier for us because we labeled one as low scoring, one as average scoring or borderline, and the third one as high scoring or clear pass. And based on these 3 cohorts, we used the same method for the borderline. So here in the borderline group and borderline regression, the clear fail, borderline or clear pass were identified by the experts on the performance. There, they were identified by the software. The rest of the method remained the same. For the 3 cluster mean, we averaged out the scores of the borderline group. For the 3 cluster regression, we used the same process as we use in borderline regression method. The only difference was use of an expert faculty, clinician, who has at least 5 years of experience, and a software. What we found, yes. So we found 3 different methods to come out as the most valid methods. One of them was the Winian method, which is a norm reference. We questioned the use of norm reference. We did not recommend as part of the study because we don't use norm reference method. The other 2 was borderline regression. Even then, borderline regression was coming out to be the best. So my study also positively accepted or influenced what was coming out in the other parts of the world as borderline regression to be one of the best methods. And 3 cluster mean method came to be very, very close with borderline regression method. We did not use experts, we used the computer software. So when you go back, how will you choose any standard setting method for yourself? There are various methods available. What is the philosophy of education and assessment in your institutions is very, very important. What are you trying to do? What is the purpose of assessment? Is it high stakes? Is it middle stakes? Is it low stakes? What is the type of assessment? Is it a selection exam? Or is it a criterion reference exam? Are you certifying and licensing people? What is the scoring criteria? What are the expected outcomes? How many failure students will you be able to politically defend also comes part of the discussion. How much pass rate can you politically defend, socially defend? What are the social impacts and outcomes of the pass-fail rate? What are the social impact of pass-fail rates and political impacts? All are discussed. And then you make a decision. Do you have the institutional expertise for that standard setting method? And do you have the resources available to follow that standard setting method? These are the various aspects you keep in mind while you decide which standard setting method to follow. After you set a standard for each question and for the exam, again comes a question: is passing compensatory across different skills, across different domains of knowledge, across different concepts, or is it not compensatory? I will give you an example. For example, in the medical college, we have knowledge-based exams, written exams. We have exams of clinical skills. Can these both compensate with each other? Shall a student with very good knowledge and with no skills compensate and get an average aggregate pass mark and should be allowed to be a doctor, certified, licensed to be a doctor? Can a student with good clinical skills and not so good knowledge be passed? So can they both average out or can they not? Even in one single paper, there are various concepts. In a paper pencil test, in a 101 best MCQ test, there are different concepts. Do you want the students to know a few of them and not know a few of them? Is it okay with you or not okay? There are no black and white answers to it. You will have to go back to the questions. What is the purpose of the test? What is the philosophy of the test? What do you want to do? What do you want the students, how do you want the students to use that knowledge and skills later? How essential each of the components in the exam is for them in future. And that is how you will make this decision. If the students should pass, must pass the different components separately and then be allowed a pass, means you are following a conjunctive standard. If you say, oh no, in this 100 MCQ paper, the NGOF said the passing mark is 43%, the student may do very well in a few topics and concepts. He may not even know a few chapters, few topics, few concepts. If the student gets an aggregate of 43%, the student will be a pass. It's okay. It is based on your rationale, your purpose, your principle, your philosophy.
Then you have to define some core skills.
Exactly. Based on the content. What is a must know? And if the students have chance later to improve upon those, or if this is the last time they are going through this. If this is the last time they are going through this, if they will make the safety of the society, of the public at stake, then you have to make some very stringent decisions. Some other thoughts. As I said, now people are realizing, even standard setting experts are realizing, that there are a lot other issues which needs to be taken into consideration. And that's where the art comes with the science. After you follow the process and 80% of the class is failing, what do? Can you afford it? Will you stick to what your judges said and you followed the process? There was an educational expert facilitated, or you will look into it again. I'm sure you will look into it again. And that is why now people are saying that judges, the panels are not standard setting, they are standard recommending. You have to look at political and social issues of the decisions you make. And now what people are recommending is using two different methods and then see how close they are. And you can decide in between them based on the error, the reliability, and based upon the political and social issues. And this era of new thought is being named as era of realistic acceptance. Standard setting started in 1950. There is no evidence of criterion reference standard setting earlier than 1954, I believe. That era, before 1954, is known as era of innocence. People didn't know. Naivety. And we belong to that era even today. Okay. And then there was an era of awakening where there was criterion reference standard setting methods being used. Various methods proposed being used, the strengths and limitations studied. And then people saw that on the same test, two different methods give them two different pass scores. And that was an era of disillusionment, confusion. They thought if you use any of the method and you follow it correctly, religiously, you will come to the same passing score. No. And that is why when you look at the definition of standard setting, it makes it more defensible, more credible, more just for students, more fair. There is no one correct gold standard which we go and find out. It is just a scientific process with the arts in it, with your skills and thoughts and minds, that whatever decision you take is just, is fair, is defensible, and is credible. And this is my last message. There is no gold standard. It just makes the process less arbitrary and more defensible, both for the institutions and for the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naveed, for the wonderful presentation. Now the time is for panel discussion and question answer. We have invited Dr. Shazia Babar. She is working as a senior instructor in the Department for Educational Development and Department of Ops and Gynae. Dr. Naveed, and we also invited Dr. Lubna Beg. She's a Pro-Vice Chancellor, Dean Apna Institute at Jinnah Sindh Medical University, but due to some urgent work, she's not coming. So, Dr. Naveed. And the session is open for queries, any clarification.
Yes.
We've heard that what you can do is make bell curves and cut a mean, and where does all that come in here? I never heard you sing anything of that.
Very, very good question. And I debated with myself as to how much to include in one presentation, even till 1 p.m. today. And Azam said, you are very adventurous. You are even not sure what you're going to present at 2 p.m. So see, there are two very distinct kinds of assessment. And much of education that we follow today comes from or is based on studies from psychology. And if you look at attributes of psychology or psychological measures, such as intelligence, they are all supposed to be bell curved, normal population, normal curve, right? And that is from where we adopted the principle. And we wanted, and we still would like all assessments to be bell-shaped. These are all thoughts coming from assessments belonging to norm reference domain. With time, we did move to criterion reference domain, where we say that now we will judge every student based on how much they know against the criteria laid on, against the learning objectives laid on. And that is why when I say you choose a standard setting method, it has to be based on your philosophy. So the philosophy can be norm referenced, even valid today for selection tests, or it can be criterion reference. For example, you want all your students to know a certain concept. It is an essential must-know concept. Will you get a normal curve if you assess your students on that? You may not. And that is your happiness. That is your success of not getting a normal curve. So there is a tension between the two schools of thoughts. Again, some people would say that you pitch the difficulty of that content so high that you get a normal curve. However, I would say there still lies a tension between norm reference assessment philosophy and criterion reference assessment philosophy. A few experts, international experts, a very few have written on it. You may find some very bold articles on people writing the relevance of a bell curve this day when we follow criterion reference. And then there are others who would contest this thought. I hope I have given you the answer.
Okay. Any further clarification question? So we have few participants from IED, from Human Development Program, and from Examination Board. So online participants, do you have any query, any concern? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Dr. Okay. G, do you have any concern, any query?
Can I ask? Anil Kamis from Nairobi here.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Yusuf, thank you. That was an excellent overview and a very comprehensive analysis of assessment and assessment history. Coming from a more educational and development perspective, I fully appreciate the point you made on the question of do no harm in society and having that moral responsibility. However, I'd like to bring your attention to a very interesting program in King's College London in England, which is actually admitting students to medical college who don't have a high school diploma. And the reason is that they're not assessing what the students know, but their potential to be good medics and to be good, what shall we call them, good citizens of society to serve those who are disenfranchised from society, who they themselves represent. I'd like your thoughts on how we would think about assessment for those that don't have a basic qualification for entry into higher education programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khamis, for a very interesting question. I hope my voice goes there. Is it? Right.
Yeah.
When I reflect on this example, to be a good doctor, you need intelligence and you need certain other skills. You need to be a good human, you need to be a very good team worker, you need to be a good communicator and other skills. And there are other examples as well where other institutions are now focusing equally on both academic achievement and on these other skills. Even at AKU, for a postgraduate resident entry exam, we use multiple mini interviews, which would focus on their non-academic skills, which would include their interpersonal and communication skills, problem solving, logical thinking, and so on. You will have to look at the wider context, and I'm sure there may be certain measures or evidences they would have that those students, regardless of having a diploma or not, they should have certain basic knowledge or certain abilities and achievements required to progress to further studies. Or on the other hand, such institutions have 1 or 2 years of prep studies. Leila is here. I'm sure there are other members of the medical college here. So I would just leave us to reflect again as to the context, as to what do we have around, and if not the high school certificate or any other diploma, what other measures do we have to ensure both academic ability and other skills in order for the students to successfully progress through the medical school years. A good thought for us again. Thank you.
Any further clarification question?
I have one.
Yes.
First of all, a very excellent presentation. I enjoyed it and I learned a lot. I wanted to further learn on the borderline linear regression method. When we have regressed and we have values and we have entire model, how do we further go into it then? Can you please elaborate?
If I can have the clicker, please. I know you are coming from a statistical background. I think I have a slide which I did not show today. This is exactly how it's done. So the scores will be regressed on your global rating, and the score which corresponds to the borderline grade will be the pass score of the exam. Makes it clear?
Mike, please.
Hear me?
Yes, yes, I can.
Can hear me? Oh, thank you so much for the very nice presentation which you made on assessment. I was just wondering that despite all this, what I've seen in my practical experience that in undergrad and in postgraduate exam, the threshold is fixed at around 60% or 50%, irrespective of the nature or the type of exam. Sometimes the students may have very difficult questions in the exam. Sometimes the exams is very easy. But then it's always 60% passing, for example, in the postgraduate examination. So why are we not changing the system, and why are we not doing this kind of exercise? Because when you go to the Western countries and to the US, there's a sliding scale which moves according to the difficulty of the exams. It's not fixed at, like, for example, 50 or 60%. So why are we not changing our system of assessment or setting of the standards, whatever?
Yes, I think we started responding to the need very well identified for clinical examinations back in 2009. And
you are using standard setting for all the objective structured clinical exam. Till year 3 we have done.
yes, but as I said, it also depends upon the resources you have. And we still struggle to find 6 experts come and decide on the yeah. So there are various logistic challenges. However, I know the difficulty level varies. What we try is to balance the difficulty level of the examination during a pre-exam review. So that is always done to the best of our expectations as to how the items will perform. However, yes, our exam may go slightly more difficult or slightly more easy. And in order to make sure that you have a very defensible and credible cutoff score, standard setting is the right way to go. I hope we have enough resources and will to move forward. Thank you.
Any further question?
Thank you. Thank you so
Okay,
much. Appreciate it.
I don't think there is any further questions. So with this note, we conclude the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Naveed, for the wonderful presentation, and Dr. Shazia for coming here as an expert for the panel discussion. Thank you so much for all the participants to come here and attend the session. Thank you. The tea is outside. Please. Thank you.
Thank you.